now we're to the point where the colonists are done and Britain is done with the colonists. And following the Boston Tea Party, British Parliament and King George are ready to make an example of Boston. So, to punish the Bostonians, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, which are also known as the Intolerable Acts. These were a set of British laws passed to punish the people of Boston after the Boston Tea Party. So the main things that this did, it prevented Massachusetts from governing itself. It got rid of the legislature. Assembly was no longer made up of elected representatives, but now it was a council of officials that had been appointed by the king, so it would be loyal, excuse me, to Britain. The Quartering Act that required citizens to house and feed soldiers was strengthened. And most importantly, the port of Boston was closed until the residents paid for the tea destroyed in the Tea Party. Britain hoped that this would isolate Boston from the rest of the colonies and convince the other colonies to be obedient. Make a example of Boston. Instead, towns near Boston sent much needed supplies to the city and took in Bostonians who were leaving Boston to look for work. Other colonies called for meetings to decide on what a response would be, and a united response. An attack made on one of our sister colonies, is an attack made on all British America. And this is a quote from the House of Burgesses, which is located in Virginia. So on September 5th, 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. It was a meeting of representatives from all American colonies to decide on what they were going to do in response to the Intolerable Acts. There were 56 representatives. They included Patrick Henry, who was famous by this point. He was part of the House of Burgesses. Samuel and John Adams from Massachusetts, and George Washington was there as well. One of the few meetings he will be able to attend, because once the war begins, he's going to be out leading troops. The main purpose was to discuss ways to have the Intolerable Acts repealed. They're not ready for a Declaration of Independence or anything like that. They essentially want to try and come up with a political way to resolve these issues. They wanted to assert the rights of the 13 British colonies, but instead, they voted to end all trade with Britain and Ireland. It was also time to start preparing to fight. They kind of realized at this point that if diplomatic discussions didn't work, that was going to have to be the next step. Go ahead and pause and answer these two questions. How did the colonies react to the Intolerable Acts? What were the Intolerable Acts? And how did they backfire on the British government? In local areas, militias began to step up their training and stockpiling of supplies. This is where Minutemen come into play. And a Minuteman was an American colonial militia member who was ready to join in combat at a moment's notice. Within a minute is kind of where they get their name. Britain had ordered the British governor of Massachusetts to take forceful action against the militias, who were beginning to strengthen their numbers as well as their supplies. In April 1775, the governor learned that militias were storing military supplies in the town of Concord, and he decided he would take the supplies and arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were staying in Lexington while he was at it. Two of the best-known Sons of Liberty. However, the governor's plans are leaked, and Paul Revere, who is a local silversmith who had taken part in the Boston Tea Party, formed a plan to warn Massachusetts militias. His plan was to alert the Sons of Liberty in Charlestown when the British left Concord. He was going to use lanterns in the Old North Church steeple, and one lantern would be displayed if the British had left on land to head to Concord and Lexington. 2 lanterns would be used if the British left by water. So April 18, 1775, Paul Revere learns that the British are going to cross the bay. He had a friend hang the 2 lanterns in the steeple to indicate that they were leaving by sea. And while he rode across the bay to Charlestown to a waiting horse, others are also beginning to take up arms. So he sets off on his famous ride. He stopped at houses and villages to warn the local militia the British were coming. Understand that the epic poem that we all know by Henry, Wadsworth Longfellow, he is not riding across the countryside shouting. That's not a very good way to not be found or captured. So yes, he just stops at houses and they start spreading the word from house to house. And also, most importantly, Paul Revere was not the only rider, and he doesn't actually even finish the ride. When Paul Revere stopped in Lexington to warn Adams and Hancock, William Dawes joins him. There's also a third rider, Dr. Samuel Prescott, who had caught up with Revere and Dawes farther down the road. But eventually, a patrol of redcoat soldiers stopped the riders. Dawes and Prescott were able to escape, but Revere was held and questioned. Prescott was the only one of the three who was actually able to complete the full ride. And when the British arrived, the militias were ready for them. Go ahead and pause the video and answer these two questions. How did Paul Revere and others alert the Massachusetts militia about the approaching British soldiers? Is Paul Revere an important figure in American history? Why or why not? There is not a right or wrong answer here, but you do need to be able to use evidence. As the British approach Concord, they can hear church bells ringing in the distance, and they can see that lights are on in the windows. It's early morning at this point. They had lost the element of surprise. At sunrise on the 19th, troops reached Lexington, and when they approached Lexington, they were met by 70 armed militiamen. The militia were inexperienced, and the British had larger numbers. Chaos ensues. British officer Major John Pitcairn wanted to disarm the colonists, not engage in battle, and unfortunately that's not what happens. The British advanced and a shot rang out. Pitcairn tried to stop his troops, but the shooting continued for 20 minutes, leaving 8 Lexington men dead and 10 wounded, and 1 British soldier wounded. No British soldiers were killed. By 8 a.m., the British had reached Concord, and Americans inflicted many casualties on the British as they are fleeing back to Boston. Hundreds of militiamen hid behind trees, walls, rocks, and buildings and fired upon the soldiers. The soldiers ended up panicking. The British responded by sending advancing troops to set fires to homes and kill residents on the way back to Boston. Lexington and Concord are considered the first battles of the American Revolution. And by the end of the day on April 19th, there were 73 dead British and 200 wounded or missing. There were 49 Americans killed, with at least 39 wounded or missing. So now revolution and the war are inevitable. Tensions had turned into open violence. Colonists had to choose sides. The Patriots were the American colonists who supported the right of the American colonies to govern themselves. At first, not all Patriots wanted to actually declare independence from Britain, but they did want some form of self-governance in the colonies. On the other side, you have your Loyalists, also known as Tories. Loyalists are American colonists who support Britain during the American Revolution. They are a minority, and it is dangerous for them. Many of them, their homes are burned, they're excommunicated or kicked out of the area from which they're from. Many end up fleeing to Britain. So go ahead and pause and go ahead and answer this question. What were the results of the fighting at Lexington and Concord? Why did the battles of Lexington and Concord increase tensions between the Patriots and the Loyalists? What details support the idea that the Patriots won these battles?